Printing on fabrics with a latex printer requires an understanding of how fabrics are constructed, the different types of fabrics, and what to look for. Latex printers print beautifully on fabric, coated or uncoated. But there are things that I recommend you understand, and I'm going to go over fabric printing, things to look for, loading procedures, and then finally printing itself. But before I load the material, the first thing I figure out is this fabric likely to work with a latex printer? Now, as I say over and over again, the media locator is the place to start. But just because it's on the media, not on the media locator, doesn't mean the fabric won't work very well. This that I have here is a Burger stretch canvas. I believe that this is on the media locator, but if it weren't on the media locator, I'm certainly sure that this will print. But there are things I look for in a fabric before I even consider loading it in the printer. The first thing is, for a latex printer, is it on a 3-inch core? Now, the smaller printers, the 310, the 330, they will allow you to print with a 2-inch core that the core comes that way. It's convertible. You can buy a conversion core for a 360 if you want to run 2-inch cores. But I think you'll find that most fabric does come on a 3-inch core. By fabric, I mean fabric that you would buy that's designed for digital printing. Okay, you can't just go to a hobby store or a fabric store and buy fabric off the shelf and expect that to work in a latex printer. Usually those fabrics are not prepared on the roll evenly or with the edges cut properly to run through a digital machine. If you're going to run digital or run fabric on a latex printer, you want to buy digital fabric. So the stuff with the raw edges, what we call salvage edges, those are really not ideal to run on a latex printer, and they probably are not going to work. It's just going to cause a lot of frustration. There's a wide range of fabric manufacturers who are designing their fabrics to run on digital printers. Fisher Textile, Aurora Textile, Burger Textile, George and Otto Friedrich, Haytex, you get the idea. There's a long list of them, and almost all of those fabrics will work well. Now, the first thing you want to know is how stretchy is the fabric? A lot of uncoated fabrics may be extremely dimensionally unstable or very elastic. If it's too elastic in both directions, that is, if you can take the fabric and stretch it in both ways, it's going to be harder to run through the printer. At a certain point, the stretchability of the fabric will make it impossible to go through a latex printer. Some fabrics that are impregnated with a lot of spandex to give them a lot of stretch, well, the stretch is good for the wrinkle resistance, but what it's not so good for is running through a latex printer. There are other sublimation printers that may be able to handle a fabric like that, but the latex is going to have some trouble. It's going to either tend to bunch up in the pinch rollers, or it will tend to misregister. I would say about the most stretchable I can run through the printer would be something like a Fisher Easy Stretch. It does stretch in both directions. It does require some attention in loading. It certainly does require a take-up roll, but any more elastic than that, and it's probably not going to work. And that's kind of one of the tougher fabrics to run. There are materials that are stretchable in one direction, dimensionally stretchable. Those are more stable, and I would recommend those in most cases if you're going to run something that needs wrinkle resistance. Now, this is called a stretch canvas, and it has a little give in both directions, but it's not much of a give. It's just a little bit of give to give it a little elasticity, but mostly this is a fairly tight weave. The other thing to notice about this fabric is it has undulations on the edge. The edges have these little waves on them. That probably happens when it was cut from a master roll, and those waves may require the use of the edge guards. It just depends on how high they come up. The edge guards may be able to hold those down. Now, if the undulations on the edges are too big, even the edge guards are not going to hold it down, and in which case that's going to be incompatible with a printer because the carriage will keep catching those edges. The edges should be as flat as possible across there, not having it kind of undulate like this, which you can kind of see a little bit. The next thing I'm going to figure out is the fabric coated or uncoated? If it is coated, I want to know what side it's coated on. Some manufacturers are very clear. There'll be a label inside the core as well as a sticker on the roll that says inside print or outside print. What they mean is they did some kind of coating or some kind of change to the surface of the fabric so that there is an optimal print side. If that's the case, make sure you're aware what optimal print side you're printing on. A lot of people will take fabrics that are really coated and then mistakenly print on the wrong side and not be happy with the results. So printing on the correct coated or uncoated side matters. Next, if it's an uncoated fabric, it's not that big a deal. You can kind of choose which side you choose to print on. It's more of a preference then rather than a coating-based need to print on one side or another. This particular material is an uncoated fabric. That is, there's no specific coating on it. You could choose to print on the inside of the roll or on the outside of the roll. My preference is to print on the outside of the roll if they look the same. If one side looks different than the other, then it's a matter of aesthetic preference on which side I think I would like to print on. Other things I look for before I even load the fabric is I want to make sure upon inspection on arrival that the fabric has not been damaged. Oftentimes fabric will be damaged or bent or the cores can be crushed in shipping. Those are going to be very difficult to run because fabric needs really to be nice and even and flat to go through the printer. If you have a core that's bent or you have sort of undulations in the top here because it pinched or in some way it was put on the core incorrectly, those can all affect the likelihood it's going to print successfully. If you have it on the core where they have it kind of puckered on the edges, and as a result, it sort of waves along the surface as it comes through, that's going to go through the pinch rollers and actually cause bunching, and you're going to get little tunneling through there. When the print head comes across, that tunneling is going to manifest by having the carriage touch it, and it'll leave little marks. That usually indicates that the fabric was not prepared correctly or transferred correctly from a master roll to a smaller roll, and it's really more of a media issue than a latex printer issue. It is not uncommon to find fabric rolls that were damaged in shipping or incorrectly transferred to the core or have some other material handling problem. That is, it's not their printer, it's the roll that you purchased isn't as, or it does not have the integrity that we would need to run on a digital printer. Now, most rolls come in fine, and certainly most reputable fabric manufacturers do a very good job on quality control to make sure that everything's on the roll evenly, it's transferred to the core properly, and everything works fine. Another thing I look for is I want it to be as much as possible a nice straight even line here on the edge of the core where the fabric is applied. Now it can drift some. The printer will allow for that. So if the fabric kind of shifts along and side to side, that's generally not too big a deal because the take-up roll will sort that out. The printer will kind of gently glide at one edge or another. But if it's really irregular, it can cause problems traveling through the printer. I'm also looking for any imperfections, things that are clearly wrong. Sometimes when they get rolls of fabric, people install them and they kind of bounce them out of the box. Well, what happens then is the fabric hits the ground and it puts a dent in one end. And if you have that dent in the end, that indentation, it will travel through the print path and you'll get one end that sags kind of funny and it can contribute to head strikes. One way to test for that is you take the roll and instead of printing on one end, you print on if you were printing on the outside, switch the roll around so now you're printing on the inside, which means the dent will switch to the other end of the printer. And if then it manifests on the other end of the printer, you know you have a damaged roll. So inspecting the roll, making sure everything is right before you even load it in is one of the key things to look for with fabrics. You can't just take any old fabric and load it in the printer. Fabric printing requires some attention. It's not like printing on adhesive vinyl or banner, which is very easy. Fabric's going to take a little more awareness of types of fabrics and what to look for in the fabric before you even put it in the machine. So next what I want to cover is, now that we've chosen a fabric, I'm going to show you some little tricks that I have that help you load the fabric and put it in through there and make sure that everything's going to print fine before you even hit print. Because you don't want the fabric to travel through the printer incorrectly and cause head strikes or have the carriage grab the fabric.